now we have like 30 minutes to discuss any broader topics. So probably, I don't know, if we have Josh, I would like to ask about what the future of Smart FHIR. What are you guys going to add to it? What the problems you want to solve with the next version of Smart FHIR?
Yeah, so in one sense, the Smart App launch specification has become the target of regulations directly in the US. It's referenced from the ONC's Cures regulations, and the most recent set of proposals now from CMS refer to it directly. And it's also referenced in the IPA, International Patient Access Guides. And what that means is that there's a lot of eyes on the spec and a lot of responsibilities that come with it. So this makes many organizations much more conservative in terms of how we evolve or change the spec over time. There's a certain pressure to make sure we don't do too much too quickly or without feedback. And so that reflects kind of where we are right now in the maturity cycle of the specification. That said, there's a couple of new features coming out in the near term. We have what's called the 2.1 revision to the Smart App Launch Guide, which should be coming out in the next couple of months. And one of the things that it includes is support for a capability called app state, which is the idea that some apps, especially very simple apps that are purely client-side, so maybe just HTML5 and JavaScript. It's a very convenient and easy and safe way to package up apps. But historically, those kinds of apps, they can read data from the EHR, but if they need to store any information, even just user preferences, they have to go and find their own HIPAA-compliant storage and spin up those kinds of services. So the Smart App State capability is one that allows apps to keep a very small amount of data in the EHR associated with a patient record or with a user. And one of the first use cases for this is one that I think is really excellent, which is end-to-end encrypted versions of a patient's data from at home. So Apple has built something like this already in their clinician-facing dashboard. You can install a clinician-facing app from Apple in, about 5 or 6 EHRs today, including Cerner and Meditech and Athena Health and a few others. And that dashboard what it does is it actually fetches a file that's encrypted. So Apple doesn't want to and does not see the health data in this scenario. But in order for that to work, to allow for that end-to-end encryption, the app needs to be able to write the decryption keys into the EHR so that they can be maintained safely. So that's an example of a new feature that's coming in the next version of Smart. It's a very small capability in terms of the API surface area, but it allows for some new patterns of interaction and some better application capabilities. That's in the near term. In the longer term, I also want us to develop, and I think we will develop, some stable patterns for surfacing data from more than one server. So right now, Smart assumes that there's just this FHIR server representing the system of record. You get an access token, you can talk to that server and write any query you want. But in the real world, health systems are complex and multifaceted. They might have one clinical data server from their EHR, but they might also have an imaging server from a PACS vendor, and they might have a genomics server that sits next to all this. And it would be nice if patient-facing apps could just ask for permissions once and get an access token that could be used in that little constellation of servers that together make up the full patient record. So I think we'll be doing some work in terms of communicating what are some auxiliary servers where an app might need to go to fetch data. And the motivating use case right now is how do we provide patient access to imaging data? How do I get my DICOM studies through an API rather than having to drive across town and get a CD-ROM and then order a CD-ROM drive on Amazon in order to be able to see those images? So those are a couple things that are coming.
And you see that something like JODS authorization will be used in scenarios?
Well, so I think that under the hood, most servers are going to leverage JSON Web Tokens to capture some of these details in a stateless way. I think it's a good pattern. So far, we've avoided describing that at the Smart API level. We've used API calls for things like token introspection to preserve options under the hood so that servers can use their existing conventions and then just allow an app to query rather than expecting an app to directly crack open a token and understand what's inside. We could change that decision over time, but we've been reluctant to over-prescribe how that works. I'll say that in the bigger picture, there are some exciting and interesting things happening in the space of authorization. So one that I've been tracking pretty closely is the GNAP protocol being developed in IETF. And in a lot of ways, this is designed as a successor to OAuth 2. It's the grant negotiation and authorization protocol. So I don't know if one day we'll have a version of SMART that uses GNAP or whether that's just going to have to be the next thing. And SMART is going to stay in its lane and we'll start a new project when it's the time to take advantage of some of these new capabilities. Managing some of these changes can be really hard.
Thank you, Josh. And I've seen you're researching like internet identity stuff. Do you think something like this may happen in near future?
Yeah, well, near future is tough. I think that the standards around decentralized identifiers are very interesting and potentially quite powerful, particularly for architectures where a patient wants to bring together a large set of their data into a personal store and then be able to set policies downstream to say things like anybody with a certain credential can access my data. So I think there's like a lot of good building blocks today and some really interesting things that folks are exploring. There's some demos that you can try out. Auth0 has one for playing with decentralized identifiers and sort of what they consider to be mobile wallets. And they have some use cases in healthcare. Microsoft has a set of tools that are deployed sort of for issuing verifiable credentials on top of this technology. But it's still pretty early, and it feels like everybody's assembling these pieces in a slightly different way. So we're at the stage right now where you can build a pretty compelling example. But whether you're going to use that technology stack with decentralized identifiers and data hubs, or whether you want to look at the work that's happening on the solid protocol from the W3C perspective for personal data stores, there's some convergence of ideas, but the specs are still all over the place.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, guys, any topics to discuss? So we have a nice group. Feel free to unmute yourself, turn on the camera, and talk with us. Okay, so I see Isaac left us. I just wanted to ask about Epic support of Smart on FHIR plans. Isaac, are you here? No, we don't have Isaac. Okay, Pavel, maybe you have question.
I don't have questions, but what I want to say, I don't know if anybody here was at our FHIR meetup. We had actually in person, and unfortunately, I still regret we don't have recording of that one. It was 2019 in Irvine, and it was a presentation by Vivek Kaliraman, I think, from Handoff Company. And he basically was, all his talk was about how his company failed to use Smart on FHIR, like with one of large HR vendors. Like they were like killing themselves for like 9 months, moving from public sandbox to private sandbox to hospital, like finding the differences at every stage and like finding missing API endpoints, and ended up just, shutting down the whole thing and switching to HL7v2. And I'm just very excited actually to see how it changed, between 2019, it was October, and now, it's all in production, many different companies with different HR vendors. I think it's a great progress. I mean, maybe it's not a perfection, Brandon indicated a lot of issues. We also like build Smart on FHIR applications and experience similar stuff, but the progress is very, very, very nice.
Yeah, but what interesting trend I see that we have more and more FHIR native systems, yes, and so it looks like in the near future, I see how many startups are aggregating and using FHIR as internal data models. So, and many like next generation EHRs are built on top of FHIR on top. Okay. So that I expect that the near future it will be quite easy to communicate FHIR resources of high quality, because there is a lot of questions to the quality of the data inside FHIR now, but it's getting better and better. So, and Gasper, what do you think? So, was you able to get all the information you need from these EHRs, or there's still some missing parts?
We were able to get all the information from the EMRs, but that was purely because we worked on them when the data was being modeled. We didn't have a voice into how the data should be modeled, but we had a voice into what data should be modeled in there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the standardizing on the data was done, including, and we were included in that. But due to the restrictions of each EMR, we didn't really have, we couldn't say how they should model it. We just told them what to model. So mm-hmm. basically the request form, so the question answers, that was something that we all agreed on. But whether they mapped this to questionnaire or observation or whatever, that's something that we didn't have a voice on. So I think the content part, that's something that the FHIR profiles and IGs have to work on. And those are the ones that will provide quality FHIR resources. And we see this being done on wide scale in the UK, for example. The UK has, the NHS Digital is working a lot on that. In the Netherlands as well. So I think on national scales, those implementation guidelines are the ones that give true power to FHIR.
But did you have a separate backend in your application, or you just works and everything is coming from the EHR?
We do have we do have our own backend. Basically, it's the integration platform we call it. And so our front-end facing application goes to our backend, and it's the backend that integrates not only to an EHR, but also to other sources. So I think it was John who previously mentioned the DICOM and also XDS, and we have several data points that we fetch into, that we integrate into, to provide kind of a holistic view on the patient record, and for that tumor board solution. It's not just data coming from an EMR, but it's data coming from multiple sources.
How you structured did you try to adopt FHIR as your internal model, or you just completely?
Yeah, guys are FHIR native.
Okay.
Yeah, we use FHIR, but we try to follow existing guidelines. So for example, for the workflow definition, we follow the IHE XW profile, and for that we use the FHIR test, for example. For the patient, we obviously use patient. That would be very hard to use anything else for. But for the request form, we use the questionnaire and questionnaire response. So we try to be standardized that way, and we hope that others follow, so that we really are plug and play, however that's possible or not, but to the maximum point. So yeah, we do use FHIR, and we try to follow the guidelines.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the app launch. Did anyone successfully use an IAM solution like Ping Identity, Auth0, or Okta in between launching their app and the actual, and let's say Epic or another EHR solution?
Can you a little bit clarify? Do you mean that double O's, like you have your own identity provider and you want to launch from Epic and then log in into your system, like SSO scenarios? Or?
Yeah, SSO scenario where we, instead of just launching our app directly, we wanted to go through a solution like Auth0 or Ping Identity, and basically sort of them acting as a service provider. And from there, going to our application, because they have multiple instances of our application. Mm-hmm. So, sort of have like that like Epic being the identity provider, ping or Auth0 being the service provider, and then our application being the endpoint application of a kind of a regular SSO process.
Theoretically, you can use just double login, and it can be it will be cached. Yes, so the login only should log in twice into Epic and into your application. After that, your application may have both keys. And
okay, but we had like issues that after the token response from the token endpoints, we were getting the details outside of the access token, right? From Epic, for example, outside of the access token or the identity token. So those parameters were not like by default. Let's say they were not used by that IAM solution, so they could only get because it's different from the regular OIDC protocol. So they were not they couldn't get to those details. And then with another vendor, we had an issue where just the launch token could not be used in the their OAuth flow because they couldn't do anything custom, and launch is not part of the OAuth standard.
I mean, we have integrated in that way with both the Epic, Cerner, Chipsoft, EasyCare, and it does work how you have described that it didn't for you. Basically, we did get the context, so the non-standard OIDC scopes claims back, but with the solution that we use, so with the Keycloak, you're able to map that however you please. So you can say, okay, the claim that's called patient ID, I'm gonna take that and add it to the user's attribute. And that
what the solution that you guys use?
Keycloak.
it's open source cloud server, yeah. Keycloak.
Okay, thank you.
And I have another. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Start. Sorry, Jackson. Yeah.
No, I was about to do a topic change, so if you have something there, please go ahead.
No. I'm gonna change topic after you.
Okay, great. So I just have a question about kind of the limits of FHIR or smart on FHIR, and I'm just wondering if anybody could give an anecdote or an example in their developer experience about somewhere where they found that they were running up against some limit that just wasn't going to work with the standard, and maybe they used HL7v2 or something. That's something that I've noticed some people talking about, and I'm kind of new to this space, so maybe this is an inappropriate question, but I am curious if someone could share an anecdote about that.
Oh, that's very interesting question, and the problem is still not yet solved. So if we're talking about HL7v2, it's a system-to-system integration. Yes, that means you have two persistent systems, they function, and then can exchange the feed of changes, and one system can replicate state from another system, and that's worked very nice, and that's how most of distributed systems doing this. So the smart on FHIR is API driven, and initially API was, again, it's my opinion, was done for short-living clients. Yes, so you're opening the browser page, it's getting the data, the state from server, do something, maybe save something to the server, and then disappear. So, and I'm talking for a long time about this, that REST API is not the best way to integrate between the systems. So it may work in some situation when you're making some patient portal or something like this, when you're aggregating patient data, not all of the patients from external system, yeah, but this specific patient from different systems. Yeah, you can get this data through the REST API and store cache to do something like this, but you don't have even the way to check that this data was changed. So you need somehow to refresh and go and again send all the requests, save some token, or on the next visit of the user you will be able to request this data. So that's still a problem. Yeah, and I don't know if we still have Josh. Josh, what do you think about this? Smart on FHIR, I don't think it's fit very well for system-to-system integration.
Well, so there's two pieces here, right? The closest that we have in the standard is smart backend services. But that is all about just a server talking to another server directly. It's not necessarily about replication of state between those two servers. So that's the pattern that we use when one system wants to do a bulk export from another system. You can get authorized to do that bulk export using smart backend services. And the bulk export specs have built some capabilities that are somewhat in the line that you're describing. So, for example, the current version of bulk export, which is the second release of that guide, allows for one system to export data, and then a day later or a week later, you can come by and say, tell me what has changed since a certain time. And so you can get information about what has been deleted or what has been updated since that time. I don't think it's necessarily a beautiful or elegant solution, but it does reuse at least the capabilities that are currently in that guide and that are part of the certification program. So it'll become a natural target for folks who are looking to do more.
Mm-hmm. So you mean that we will be able to pull for the changes, yes? Pull for the get.
Yes, I mean, it's polling in the sense that it's client driven, but it's still an asynchronous process where the server responds and says, check back, I'll tell you when I'm ready to give you the answer.
Because that was exactly my point. So now we see, for example, these ad hoc integrations through the REST API, but eventually, so the same data will be replicated into different places, but things are still moving and changing, and we will have a lot of copies slightly modified everywhere, and how to sync all of them, there's a lot of questions. So when I was thinking, I already told on the Confederated FHIR meetup that probably something like unique ID for every resource may save us. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, even so, applying these unique IDs, not just to every resource, but to every version of every resource, there's also this challenge of merging protocols, right? Either you look at what happens in the developer world, like Git, where a developer has to decide how to resolve conflicts, or you look at the semantics that you can get from, CRDT, conflict-free replicated data types, where you're kind of limited in what you can express, or you have to be very clever to make sure you avoid conflicts. It's not, I haven't yet seen a model for branching and merging clinical data that feels really seamless.
Yeah. But to be honest, the most of resources are append only, yes. So not so many changes in observations and conditions, so their records.
Well, I think spiritually that's right. In terms of the workflow, though, like just what happens when you take a FHIR observation and you mark it as entered in error, or you could think about that as an append, but syntactically it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be careful to spell out those rules about what transitions are allowed, because they're sort of safe and one way.
Mm-hmm. But eventually I can imagine that one system getting through the FHIR API data from another, and maybe through some loop, this data will get back to the source.
Yes, and if you're unlucky, there's an amplification in that loop as well. So rather than just one payload cycling around, there's exponential growth. I could imagine some very bad outcomes there.
Yeah. And it's just the beginning, yeah. Now people are happy just to get some data, yes, and start working with it, but eventually, yeah, in this integrated world, yeah. So we need something like blockchain for it.
Those will be the problems of our success.
Okay, guys, any other topics, questions? Come on. Oh, Josh, okay, so we are talking. So I remember that you were thinking about converting V2 feed into FHIR subscription. Is it still in your mind, or
Yeah, I think we've now laid the groundwork for that to happen with the subscription infrastructure. This first landed in FHIR R4B, so that's the current published version, and it'll be a bit more complete in R5, but all the building blocks are here already. So just to say this briefly, the idea is an authorized client can create a subscription by posting a FHIR subscription resource to the server. And it basically, the subscription says, here's the kind of information I'm interested in. And there's two flavors. One is what we call a resource trigger. And that's essentially the app saying, I'm interested in knowing when certain kinds of resources are created or changed on the server. And it's really a FHIR-centric mechanism. You could think about it as, you could process it through things like FHIR path expressions to detect when that event is triggered. And the other kind of trigger is more opaque. We call them event triggers. And so an app could say, hey, when an event of the following type happens on your server, let me know about it. And we created those event triggers to allow for things like bridging into HL7 version 2. So a server that supports V2 messaging could say, cool, I support event triggers for the following 35 message types, each of which just comes from V2 directly. And if a client subscribes, it would get a notification payload with a set of parameters associated with that event. So we haven't seen this used yet. So I'm not sure how well it will work in practice. There's probably still several dots to connect in terms of, do you want to literally send the V2 message along with this notification? Or do you want to map it into FHIR as a requirement? Or do you want to map it into FHIR as a best effort? We'll need some real world experience to kind of iron out those details. But the core infrastructure for creating the subscriptions and triggering on the events is now in the FHIR spec.
Awesome. Yeah, but it's nice because so the legacy systems can be wrapped into the FHIR subscription product.
That's the hope. Yeah, we're trying to lower the bar for those systems to expose what they've got through the newer FHIR interfaces.
Mm-hmm. And okay, sorry guys, because you're silent. So Josh, what do you think about Zanzibar in this data log style security access control rules?
I mean, I think it's a super cool technology. To take advantage of it, you need to sort of design for it from the beginning, or at least from the inside of your system. So it's very hard to layer that kind of fine-grained policy on after the fact. But if I was designing a system right now, I would absolutely, take one of the open source implementations of that concept and try to build that into my authorization approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, last chance to.
I'll throw out a question. Hey everyone, I'm an informaticist at Flatiron Health. So really appreciate Gasper's suggestion that to get better, we need implementation guides. On the EHR vendor side, it's hard to develop a roadmap for more consistent support of implementation details, because you don't know what the market is for smart on FHIR apps that your sites are going to be interested in. So, and those implementation guides don't exist yet. So suppose that I want to get better here. Like I want, I need to prioritize somehow. I can't boil the ocean. My canonical data layer is not FHIR. There's a lot of work here. So how do I, as a EHR developer, think about this? How do I prioritize it? Where do I look for good guidance on what this implementation should look like?
Gasper?
I think there are already a couple of great detailed implementation guidelines being published in as I said before, NHS Digital is publishing it in a public registry. So you can look there. NICTIS, for example, is publishing that for Netherlands. So there are already a couple of great and detailed implementation guidelines that you can see as a model or as an example. But I think I'm I'm not sure how you would approach this from the zero. Like if you had a use case that you needed to model yourself and you didn't find a parallel somewhere in some other country, I think that would be hard to do it on your own. You need.
Yeah, I think you should start the new working group and new implementation guide. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of work in international patient summary implementation guide. I think it could be very nice, the base for most of implementations. Yes.
And I think that's why the national initiatives are the ones that have most power and most weight on them, because they have the leverage to enforce that later on. Because if you go with that as a sole vendor or as a consumer of that, then it's really going to be hard to leverage that and to force that on anyone else. And unless you force that on anyone else, unless it becomes like a national or global even implementation guideline, if it's just you who's using it, you haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the meta, I think the answer, go to FHIR community and discuss with people how and take a look what implementation guides exist. So again, my recommendation is International Patient Summary, IG, which is targeting the globe. And if you, there is a lot of groups and people are working on different domains. So you can just check what the status and if they are quite mature, so you can take it as a foundation.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. So thank you everybody for visiting us. So this is FHIR Health Dev Hub meetup. So we have a Slack chat with a bunch of experts, and you're welcome to join. Just send the form from Health Dev Hub site, and feel free to help us to organize the next interesting meetup. So if you have some hot topics or real problems you want to solve for some great ideas, please contact us. And let's do it together. So thank you everybody. So have a nice day or night or morning. Bye, and especially thank you for Josh and our speakers. Bye.